All right, so this session is about writing offers, going over some of the steps of, okay, somebody wants to write an offer. What am I thinking about? What am I coaching my client on? What are some things that I can consider strategy wise as I'm putting this offer together? And then actually putting one together. So there is quite a bit of information. So I'm going to go pretty fast on this. And the recording, I believe, will help you review certain steps as you go through this process. But what I would highly suggest is plan ahead. You want to make sure that you're looking at the right houses in the first place that are going to fit the budget and the pre-approval level for that buyer. Make sure that they're pre-approved for a particular loan type, and then you're looking for homes that are in decent condition based on that particular type of loan type, because there are some like VA and FHA where the appraisals are going to be a little more conservative. Eventually, an appraiser is going to show up and it has to meet certain standards, safety standards. Do the systems work? Is there a lot of breakdown of the house as far as water damage or missing siding, missing roof shingles, dirty flooring, missing flooring, plumbing that doesn't work, things like that. So FHA and VA, not real good loans for fixer uppers, conventional. Sometimes a few bumps and bruises are okay. Down payment and financing type. So, again, what sort of down payment do they have? We'll go over the different down payments that go with each loan type. But again, the financing part of it is so important that you want to make sure that you're looking for the right home in the first place. And then closing costs and concessions. Does your buyer need some sort of seller paid closing assistance? And what that essentially means is when you borrow money, it costs money to do so. Borrowing money is not free. Yes, we have an interest rate, but the lender has fees. It could be different for each loan type. There could be prepaid items such as interest or insurance. So there's different things that go into a loan in order for the buyer to be able to close on that. And it's never free, right? So it's either the buyer is paying for it, the seller is help contributing to pay for it, or maybe there is some sort of grant that's going to help cover some of their closing costs as well. So you really want to know your buyer and what they need. That'll also help determine what kind of house that they're looking for based on competition. So a pre-approval, getting it from the lender, it's going to have what the loan type is on it. I show this because you may run into a buyer that has a pre-approval letter or a pre-qualification letter from another lender. I want to make sure you know what to look out for. So you want to make sure it has the lender contact info on there so you can verify this thing, right? You want to see, okay, what type of loan that they're going to have. What's the purchase price or the loan amount? This is a VA loan, so you'll notice that the purchase price and loan amount match at 340. It also has an expiration date on that. Now, there is no sort of set determined time as when a pre-approval will expire. It's really per lender and what their guidelines are if it's 30, 60, or 90 days. But you want to make sure that you review this for any details that you're going to need. So since we talked a little bit about financing, some things that you're going to want to research and get comfortable with the most common loan types that we run into, such as VA loans. Being in this area with a lot of military, you're going to see a lot of these loans and they have a lot of great benefits. No private mortgage insurance. Mortgage insurance does not protect the buyer, it protects the bank if the buyer defaults. And there is a certain part of their mortgage payment that somebody, if they don't have a VA loan, they could be paying towards this mortgage insurance each month. Seller can pay up to 4% in concessions. What does that mean? If they were going to help maybe some debt payoff, maybe they were going to help with some new items in the house like energy high rated appliances or something like that, or they were going to pay for some new carpet. What are they going to do? Home warranty, things like that. And then seller paid closing cost. So there's no limits on that, but it must be allowable. Closing costs with a VA loan typically is between 1.5% and 2%. And there are certain things that the seller can pay for. So if you're getting 2% closing costs and then 4% in concessions, we're talking about the possibility of 6% assistance going to your buyer. It's going to have to be the right situation. And each buyer will have different needs depending on the property. So again, it's something that's going to take some preparation. Most often, no money down. That's what makes us one of the most attractive loans, helping our veterans and active duty military get into homes easier. Sometimes there is money down if they're buying above their eligibility or if it's a second home or something like that. The lender will tell you more on that. Um, Lowest rates, that's true. Typically, VA loan rates are among the lowest. 100% loan to value, that basically means that it's a 100% loan that should cover everything except those closing costs. And then it is for primary residence only. It can't be for an investment loan. FHA, it's another primary owner occupant loan, not for investments. Why would someone use a FHA loan? There are higher debt to income ratios. They may have a lower credit score. Someone who's a conventional buyer may have a 650 or a 680. A FHA loan buyer may have 580, 600, 620 typically. And the max loan to value, meaning how much will a bank give on an FHA loan? 96.5%. So that means the vast majority of time, FHA buyers have a lower down payment. They're paying 3.5% down. That's going to be many FHA loans. There are grants where that 3.5% down payment, they may get some sort of assistance for that. So here are the seller concessions again, which is basically 6% max. So yes, there is an FHA buyer that could get 4 or 5% closing cost assistance if the numbers work for everybody. The down payment may be a gift. So mom, dad, relative, friend, what have you, can help. There's just certain disclosures that have to happen during that process. And the rates are typically lower for FHA as well. Now, one part of their payment is going to be private mortgage insurance. So that is something that is going to be factored into their monthly payment. So conventional, this is typically somebody who may have a little bit of higher credit or a better credit history, perhaps a little bit more income. The down payment, shockingly, with a conventional can be a gift in certain circumstances, but not on investment properties. So what about concessions? And this is typically some of the most confusing of the loans because there's different concession levels depending on how much somebody's putting down. If you look at the top of the list, if it's 10% or less down payment, meaning their loan to value is 90%, they're putting down 10%, their loan's going to be 90% of the full value of the house. The max concessions are 3%. If they're putting down more, 10 to 25%, they could get 6% concessions. And then if they put down 25% or more, believe it, they can get up to 9% concessions. The more money you put down, the more your concessions can go up that a buyer can ask for. Investment properties are always maxed out at 2%. That is a common mistake agents do when they're writing offers, is they'll write it for more than 2%. And then sometimes it's a real wake-up call for maybe the agent, the buyer, when they find out, nope, you can't do that. And now all of the agreed upon numbers have been kind of thrown up in the air. So just remember with investors on a conventional loan, you're capped at 2%. And there are some minimum down payment options of 3% for first-time buyers. Those are typically special programs that the lenders may have. Now, one of the attractive things about conventional loans, you may say, well, why would somebody take this rather than, let's say, an FHA loan that supposedly has lower interest rates? Well, you do have the ability of having private mortgage insurance, for short, PMI, drop off once you hit 80% loan to value. What does that mean? Okay. So let's say I put 10% down and I'm taking a loan which is 90% of the value of a home. All right, well, over a few years, I ended up paying that down, and now I only owe 80% of that loan to value. Now the private mortgage insurance will drop off, meaning my lower payment could drop, and now I may actually be able to pay more towards the principal and make it a more attractive loan at that point. All right. So the strategy when you're going to write an offer, right? Okay. First, knowing your buyer, what they can afford, the loan type, make sure we're looking for the right house in the first place, right? Well, what kind of market is it? Is it a buyer's or seller's market? And we just came out of a really strong seller's market for a few years. Right now, is it a buyer or seller's market? That really kind of comes right down to the neighborhood. Real estate is micro, meaning what's happening in Williamsburg could be happening is different than what's happening in Portsmouth. What's happening in Suffolk is different than what's happening in Norfolk, right? And then even within these towns, you have neighborhoods and subdivisions that have their own story when it comes to inventory, buyer demand. So you really want to make sure that you're looking at this at a micro level to figure out what's going to be the best strategy for your buyer. Well, if it's a seller's market, what are we thinking? All right, the sellers have a little more leverage, right? We want stronger offers with fewer contingencies, escalation clauses if this is something that's competitive, or if there's an appraisal gap. Well, we want to make sure that that's something financially we can do. It may be needed. And if it's a buyer's market, well, we want more room for negotiation on the price, maybe repairs or seller's concessions. So maybe the buyers have a little bit of leverage in that situation. If it is competing offers, well, now with a multiple offer situation, we want to consider possibly a higher price to outbid. There could be shorter contingencies. An example of that is if I typically write an offer for a buyer with 10-day inspection period, I might be writing it for 5 days, maybe even 3 days in order to be more competitive. And then earnest money. If I am typically in this market writing anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for earnest money, I may show that our buyers are more serious by putting down 2,000 or 2,500, $5,000. It all depends on the finances of your buyer and then the property that they're purchasing. So each situation is going to have a lot of different variables in it. What we're going to do here is we're going to keep it pretty basic to help you out. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that you see an offer put in on, let's just say, a typical scenario for a home, so you can at least see the mechanics of it. Some of the other factors could be the condition of the home, could be the market time, also your research on comparables, and that's going to be important. So when we start thinking about um, pricing, and we want to make sure that we understand uh, what's going on in the market, whether it's buyers or sellers, and where is this house priced based in that market right now. Well, this particular triangle known as a price derivative hopefully is a bit helpful. If you'll notice on the left, it says market value, and that's where a lot of agents are trying to price their homes. Listing agents aren't pricing with a strategy of, I'm going to overprice this home to try to make my sellers the most amount of money. That's not what they're thinking. What they're thinking is, how can I price this competitively so we get the most interest, the best offer that will also appraise? If we overprice it, the house can sit. No one's winning with a house that no one's buying, right? So if you go above the blue line, and this is when you, on the left-hand side, you start increasing the asking price above market value, you're going to get a lower percentage of buyers that are showing up. So if you're getting very few showings, you just might be overpriced. That's typically number one thing we're going to look at. Well, let's again pay attention to market value, which is that blue line. Let's start to go below that. And you can see that if we start pricing 5, 10, 15% below market value, well, now we're going to get more buyer interest that can actually drive the price up. So when we're placing an offer on a home, we want to take a look and see, okay, where is this based on what typical market value is, and get some clues on what we want to offer. Well, comparables. What are we looking at when it comes to comparables? What are we thinking about here? If I am looking for comparable sales for, let's say, a comparative or a competitive market analysis, I'm going to look in typically the same subdivision or neighborhood, if there are examples, or if I can't find something in the same neighborhood or subdivision, at least within about a quarter mile, maybe a half mile at the most, if matches are hard to find. There are certain circumstances where you may need to go over half a mile. But to be honest with you, you would be surprised how different neighborhoods can be, even just a quarter mile from each other, right? Um, and so you want to make sure that you are really looking for comparable sales 6 months or less. Sometimes we may have to go back more than 6 months if, again, if we're not finding the right examples. I'm looking for 3 to 4 comparables that demonstrate success on the market within a particular price range. So when we're pricing homes to put it on the market as a listing agent, sure, we're looking at this, but when we're helping a buyer and part of that strategy, we also want to look at some of the comparable sales. So why is that? The reason for it is we're educating our buyer. We want them to understand that they are paying a fair price for a home. This is something that we're doing for them as a service so that they can trust us and our opinion. Many times I've been in a living room with a buyer, and they'll say, all right, this home is great. What do you think we should offer? And really, what I tell them, even to this day, I'll say, let's do some research. Let's look at some comparable sales. Let's see how homes typically sell around here. I don't want to just guess at it. And that's true. So every time I'm making an offer, I'm looking at the comparable sales to see what were they thinking when they put this on the market? Is it fair market value? Did they overprice it? Did they underprice it? So I can tell my buyer, hey, here's 2 homes that I found. I can see what they were thinking when they put it on. This is a neighborhood that you really wanted to be in. There's only been 2 or 3 sales really in the last 6 months. Not often does a home list here, meaning this is not going to last long. We may want to give them something pretty close to list price to get this done, to get you in this neighborhood, right? So I can't just guess that in a living room. I have to do the right research to understand this home, how long has it been there? What condition is it in? How is it priced compared to comparable sales? What is my buyer's needs for this house? And I know that sounds a little complicated, but it's one of the most important things that you can do as an agent is understanding pricing and strategy from the list side and for a buyer. And I encourage you to spend more time with that so that you can understand it. It's going to help your clients and you're going to have higher value and you're going to become more successful in the industry. So as far as comparables, we're looking for similar construction and era built. Similar construction, meaning if this home is a brick home built in 1975, I want to try to find other brick homes that are built, within about a 10-year time span. If I have a home a buyer wants to make an offer on and it's built in 1960 and it's one floor and the exterior is brick, I'm not going to compare that to a home built in 2015 that's 2-story and vinyl sided. They are not comparable properties. So you want to look for similar criteria: bed, bath, condition, story, square footage, exterior design, garages. Is there a pool or not? Fenced or not? So same school zone or not? Right? Because I've seen that have a dramatic income or dramatic impact rather on values. So there's a lot to take in, but that's why they need you. They need a professional like you to be able to review this and give them the right information. All right, let's move forward here a little bit. Let's go ahead and check comparable sales. This is a home that's on the market. Let's say if I wanted to make an offer on this. Some of the tools we're going to be using, if some are new and have not had a chance to do this, I'm on reignmls.com. We're going to be using Matrix, which is the MLS, and then Instanet, which is also known as Transaction Desk. I'm not sure why it has 2 names, but it does. And that's where we're writing the contracts, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Where did I find this home? I wanted to use one of our listings. So on the dashboard, I'm looking at my office active listings, and I could see that this is something that was, on the market just a few days, hit 2 days ago. And I'm going to hit the MLS number to open this up. So what am I looking for? Again, I want to get to know this home a little bit so I can find comparable sales, and I'm going to show you the one cheat code here in just a second. But so this is offered at 369.9. We have three, 2.5, and a little over 1,500 square feet. So if you are new, look at more listings to learn how to read the data and find things like bed, bath, year built, square footage, things like that. You don't know unless you look. So if you are newer to real estate, I would look in the MLS every single day at all the new listings to get more comfortable with it and set up preview showings at vacant homes every single week so that you get more familiar with the neighborhoods and more familiar with the listings. All right, so this is built in 1971. That's what I'm looking at here. It's in the Green Run High School district because high schools do make a difference when it comes to value. Like if you are in, let's say, Virginia Beach, and let's say there's Cox High School, and that has good value for the properties nearby. But there's a big difference when it comes to middle school. If you have a home that's in Great Neck Middle and Cox High, that's going to have greater value, believe it or not, than one that's Lynn Haven Middle and Cox High. There's nothing wrong with Lynn Haven Middle. It's an amazing school, but it's buyer interest and demand, and that's how it makes a difference in certain things. So just moving forward here, I'm looking to see, okay, what kind of parking does it have? It has one attached garage. I'm looking at some of the agent remarks here to see, okay, have they made any changes? What's the condition? Is it old condition? Does it have some updates? Well, let's take a look. Three, 2.5, one car garage, as we said. Stainless steel appliances. Looks like in 2022, it's got quartz countertops that are pretty popular. LVP flooring in 2022, so still within 2-3 years. It is in that newer sort of category. New water heater. So there's a few things that they've done to make some improvements of this. So I'm going to look at some of the pictures. Pictures are very telling, right? All right, this home, they've done a few updates in it. It's in good condition. It's not remodeled, it's not flipped, but this is in good average condition, maybe even a little above average with some of those recent updates. So this is the home that we want to offer on. I'm kind of taking this all in again, about 370, new on the market, 2 days of market time. It would be different if we're looking at this and it has 60 days on market, right? Three, 2.5, 1,500 square feet built in the 70s. So there's a couple of things I can do. I can do a search by address, or I'm looking at the subdivision here, which is Windsor Oaks West. And I'm going to go to a residential search. I have subdivision, that's in the lower right. I can even have a whole menu that pops up if I want and type this in so they can find it. There's Windsor Oaks West, and I'm going to add that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at pending and sold. I'll leave it at 180 days. So I've got 48 matches just in that subdivision. That's quite a bit, but I want to try to narrow down the criteria to make sure that I'm finding similar homes. So I'm going to choose detached. Well, that lowered it down to 32. Well, this is a two-story home, and I want to see how do other two-story homes perform. So I put 2 stories, and then I'm at 13 matches. That's enough. I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to open up the map and see where are these in comparison to our subject property. Okay, all pretty close by. It didn't mistakenly take in some other homes outside. And then I'm going to go to results. So how I do this is I line it up by square feet. And the reason for it is if I have subdivision and there's a number of homes that are built between 1971 and 1974, that there's going to be a lot of similar floor plans, right? So square footage is going to be one of the quick sort of ways I can narrow this down to a home with a similar floor plan and size. You'll notice that we have a couple of homes that are right just like our subject property, which is right there, which is 621 Fox Hollow. And then we have another one that is at 1529. Uh-oh. I'm going to check that. Now, the one we want to offer on is at 370, and the comparable that's close is 317. Huge difference here. All right. So now I need to find out more. We have another one that is a 3, 2.5, built in the early 70s, about 1,500 square feet at 350. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and check that. Now I see a big jump in the numbers here. I see a 4-bedroom, So again, built in the 70s, about 100 square feet more, 400 and 415. So I'm not going to choose the one that has 5 bedrooms because now I'm kind of stretching it a little bit. I can make a quick adjustment based off of a bedroom, but we start going 2 bedrooms or square footage that's, you know, 400 square feet bigger. Now we're kind of getting away from something comparable, kind of going outside the lines a bit. So I'm just going to refine it and narrow. I'm going to stick to these and see what the story is. So I'm going to open this up real quick. This is the one that was at 335, dropped down to 317. So, okay, it was a conventional loan. So they found something that was probably as is. All right, very similar as far as the design, right? It's a colonial. It has one car attached garage. It's not too far from the home. It's a 3.5, built in 72. So it says that's in good condition, but it's sold as is. It should qualify for financing, but there's going to be a number of dated things in there. I looked some of the photos. You could see that this is not going to have quite the same updates as our comparable property. So you can see that, all right, that's why this was lower. Well, let's look at the next one and see what we got. So we have another Colonial again. This one hit the market at 325, but shot up in a couple of weeks to 350. I'm looking at SP, the sold price. And this was corporate seller. So now, okay, this is some sort of possible foreclosure. 2.5, a little over 1,500 square feet. So this is going to be very similar. All right. So this is a Princess Anne High School district. So you can see now we know that there's multiple high schools all in the same subdivision. So this is definitely sold as is, some sort of foreclosure, as I mentioned, distressed sale, but it looks like they made some improvements to it, and they'll do it this sometimes. So there are some they'll touch it up a little bit, add some carpet or some paint to make it a little bit more friendly for owner occupants. So in pretty good condition. Well, I'm going to look at this next one. We only have 4 comparables here. So 395 hit the market. Now it's at 400, 4 days. So this one pretty quick. It's a 4.5 and about 100 square feet bigger, still built in the mid 70s. We're looking at another difference. It's a 2-car garage rather than one. Well, let's take a look inside and see what we have. All right, nice condition. So it may not have the quartz counters and the stainless steel appliances, but it's in good condition. They certainly haven't really done much with floors either, but they've got a good price for this, right? At 400. So now I'm going to look at this one. Again, similar, yet a 2-car garage and 5 days on the market. So people were making pretty quick decisions on this. A 4.5, 1,600 square feet. So very similar floor plan to the last one we looked at. And this one is Green Run High School. Now, you have to watch out. Listing agents aren't always right about the schools. So it is up to the buyer to do their due diligence, and I would help them out to make sure that the schools are correct. You don't want to be a week away from closing and find out that little Jimmy's going to the wrong elementary school. That needs to be double checked. Don't assume it's always correct. All right, so built in the 70s again. And let's take a look on the inside and see what we got. Okay, good condition here, right? We can see some upgrades. We see some granite, see some paint, see some carpet. So when I'm looking at these comparables, and I want to leave my subject property there, so you'll notice that 621 Fox Hollow is there. There's one here that I'd say doesn't necessarily belong, and it's this one here. That was the one that had a 335, lower to 317 as is. That's going to kind of throw off the numbers here a bit because it was a little too dated and as is. Our home is in good condition, so it's going to trend closer to the ones in better condition. So I'm going to go to actions and I'm going to hit one of my favorite features here on the MLS. Everybody should pay attention to the quick CMA button. It's going to number crunch for you a bit. And this is something that I would give to a buyer. I've given sellers these and I'll say, hey, this is what I see. So it's averaging out some of the numbers. Here is our active subject property, Fox Hollow. You'll see where it says active up here. Now I've got our 3 solds and I have the averages of our 3 solds. The averages are 4.5, built in 1973, about 1,600 square feet, and the sold price 388. Let's remember that. All right. Now, this line is going to give me the average for all, so it's going to work in whatever is not sold and also sold. And I'm looking here at sale price. Let's zoom in a little bit. So this is what's telling me what's going on here. So our sale price, the list price is what they put it out there for. The sale price is what actually happened. The minimum was 350, the max is 415, the average about 388. Okay. Well, let's look at the averages for all here and then our average price, which was 388. So I'm going to do a little mental math here, right? If we're at 1529 square feet, and that's 1600 square feet, I'm probably not going to change it that much, right? But there are two differences. Does anyone remember the two differences between a couple of our comps and our subject property? Did anything jump out at you?
Bedroom count and garage.
Very good. You're tuned in. I love it. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a little bit of math here. And in this neighborhood, I would make a $7,000 adjustment for each. So if I'm at 388 and I'm going to take off $7,000 for a bedroom, okay, well now we're at 381, then I'm going to take another $7,000 off because I've got that other second attached garage. So that brings me to about 375. That's exactly how I'll do it. I'll look at this and I'll say, okay, well, if these homes are averaging about 388, the averages are for 2.5, but I've got a 3.5 with a one car garage. I'll make an adjustment for the bedroom. I'll make an adjustment for the garage and brings me to about the mid 370s. That's where I'm at on this. But so let's look at our subject property here, right? So our subject property is about 370. So let's think about this. Okay. It's a little higher than, I'm sorry, our number that came back, which was about 374, 375, is a little bit higher than the list price, right? So this is at 370 that they have it priced at. So if you're going to have a conversation with your buyer on what they should offer, if they want to offer on this home that's been on the market 2 days, what sort of conversation would you have with them? What would you advise them on? What
I would
comes?
talk to the listing agent first,
All right, great. You
get
talk to the listing
some
agent.
details.
All right. So you talk to the listing agent, and you find out that they've got two offers coming in today. Popular neighborhood. What would you suggest to your buyer? Well, they've got two offers on the way in today. Any
Well,
ideas?
with this one, it would depend on their level of interest, I guess,
Yeah. Let's
and
say,
what kind of buyers they are. Are they rational buyers or emotional?
yeah, yeah. Personality certainly does come into play, right? Some things we have to think about. Why are they buying here? Is it something that's close to work? Do they want their child in that school? Is there family in the neighborhood? Is there something where they just want to live in a home like this in the area and they're not that passionate about it? Or is there a high level of passion and interest where they're ready to compete? Because if this is on the market 2 days and you have two offers coming in, okay, well, when we looked at the comparables real quick, would you say that this is priced appropriately, underpriced, overpriced? How would you describe this home?
Well, I think it's slightly underpriced, possibly due to getting so they can get it off fast and get multiple offers and just let them know, hey, there is some wiggle room to come up. And most people will probably come up and maybe round it out because people like round numbers to 370 or something of that sort, and maybe like 372 or 372.5 to kind of make it stand out.
Hmm. Yep. So part of this is going to be your buyer's approval and financial level too. So if they are looking at 370 because they're approved at 370, they're not going to be able to be very competitive unless they could pay for their own closing costs and maybe make some concessions on the inspection contingency timeline and shorten that. If they're pre-approved to, let's say, 380, maybe they can be more competitive and offer more for the home, maybe up to, 375 or 376. I mean, in my opinion, I think if this was 375, I think it would appraise. I think that there's enough comparable information in the neighborhood for this, and especially the condition that it's in, that getting an appraisal back at 375, I think is very possible on this. So yes, Jacob is right, Zenaida is right. It comes down to your buyer's interest in this home and their neighborhood. And do they want to be competitive because it's important for them to be here in this house and they have the financial ability to do it? Or is it something where, well, we don't really need to fight for this one because we want to stay within a budget and we will take a look at some other homes. But at least you have discovered by checking comparables where this is priced. Now you know the story, right? Because before we would just be guessing, but if we look at a little bit of history, we could say, okay, well, this house is selling at 400 to 415, maybe a little bigger with an extra garage and bedroom. But even if you adjust down, we're in the mid 370s, and this priced at 370 right now, this is appropriately priced. So if you have a buyer who's saying, yeah, let's offer 350, and this is going to happen to you, right? And that's when you're going to have a conversation, and it's not you against them, right? You are advising your client and you're using the data to help you out. Because if it comes down to what they think and what you think, then they're not going to like you very long, right? They're going to think that you're trying to push them into a sale and overpay. But if you have the data and say, well, I always like to check and see what's the fair market value for the house, what's the demand and interest, how long has it been on the market, what's the condition? Well, it's been on the market 2 days. It's in good condition. They have priced it appropriately compared to some of the sales nearby. So, Mr. Buyer, if this was your house you were selling and you were on the market 2 days, would you accept an offer at 350 that is below the list price by about $20,000? Now, if the buyer still says yes, then maybe it's time for more education or maybe time for a new client, right? Because an offer like that just won't be competitive. Now, conversely, let's say this is at 370. We looked at some of the comparable sales, and most of the comparable sales are like 350, 355. Let's say they've been on the market 52 days and haven't reduced the price. Well, now it's a different conversation. Now it's a conversation as in, yeah, I looked at some of the comparable sales. Most of these are in the mid 350s. They're at 370 and haven't moved the price in over a month. Yeah, we may want to see how negotiable and how motivated are they for an offer. And at that point, yes, I may be writing below list price. But when I'm also submitting that offer, I'm letting the listing agent know, I'm like, hey, Mr. or Miss listing agent, we're not trying to lowball you. Here are some of the comparables that we looked at. And it is often that when I'm submitting an offer that might be, a little below list price or even more, I will share comparables. And I'm hoping they can share that with their clients so their seller doesn't believe we're just trying to lowball, that they realize that we're looking at data, we're looking at a home, we want to make sure it appraises, and this is why we're offering this. And that's why I would strongly suggest doing a quick comparative search just so that you've done your homework. And especially if it doesn't appraise down the road, okay, you could say, well, look, I told you so, right? But it is something that you can submit with your offer to build a conversation with that listing agent as to why you are offering lower on their home that's been on the market a while. So just a few things down the road to think about. And So if you're new to real estate, I do see a few new names here. Welcome to real estate. It's not like on TV where somebody chooses a house, signs one thing on a clipboard, and we're done, right? There is more strategy that goes into it to make sure that we're serving our clients at a high level. And through time and practice and methodically getting ready to write an offer, we're going to understand this better over time. All right. Any questions on this before we move on to actually writing an offer for this home? All right. So we checked our comparables. We have our strategy on this. And a few things to help you out. So in Brokerment, it's our document transaction system. We have a library. In the library, there's a number of things there to help you out. One of which in our transaction forms folder is an actual purchase contract checklist for an initial offer. It's a little bit of a cheat sheet to remember, okay, here are some of the things that I need to help you put together an offer for a home. Now, what makes an offer? Now, the purchase agreement contract sometimes feels a bit intimidating for agents because there's a lot of pages. It could be 20, 30, 40 pages long sometimes. But what I highly suggest is you chunk it down to certain parts of the contract that you'll need. Most often, a purchase agreement will have these elements to it. You're going to have the standard purchase agreement. That is the foundation of the offer, has most of the disclosures and the terms. What are we paying? Is there any sort of closing assistance? When's the close date? Are we inspecting? Are we doing a survey? Any other sort of type of disclosures that we have. So there's going to be a lot in that standard purchase agreement. Now, if they're buying something different, like let's say land, there is a specific land purchase agreement. But the standard purchase agreement is what you'll use most often. With each standard purchase agreement, there may or may not be addendums. So these addendums are basically additional clauses or terms that we're adding to the purchase agreement because there's so many different variables when someone is buying a house. What could somebody put? Maybe there's an addendum they're writing because they're working out some personal items they're going to buy, like patio furniture. Maybe there is some sort of other terms, like they want to make sure that there's a full understanding of the flood insurance terms or something like that. So addendums are used quite often. Now, there are addendums in the beginning, but after we have a ratified contract or further down the road, they're known as amendments. So we're amending a contract. So we have our standard purchase agreement, our foundation. We have our addendums. The next are contingencies, and there could be a number of them. So contingencies are basically due diligence that the buyer is going to do to make sure that they want to move forward on the purchase. Or it could be events that must happen. So contingencies, due diligence could be any sort of inspection. Is there a property owners or a condo association? That's a contingency. Maybe they have a home to sell. The buyers have to sell their home first before they buy. That's an event that needs to happen. Or it could be surveys for flood insurance or a number of things. And then you have disclosures. So disclosures branches off into two different types. One, there's disclosures between the firm and your buyer. Like your buyer representation agreement is also a disclosure. Consumer disclosure information form, that is one of the most important disclosures you could share with your buyer. It is a group of disclosures and buyer beware reminders that helps protect your buyer, helps protect the firm, and it helps protect you as an agent, believe it or not. So one you never want to forget. And then the summary of rights that discloses a little bit more about representation and what that means. Now, the other part of that disclosure, because you remember I said it goes, there's a fork in the road. There's two parts. There's one between you and your buyer, and then there's one between the seller and the buyer. So the seller will disclose or not disclose certain things when it comes to air noise because of our military bases. Maybe it is a lead paint disclosure, or they have no knowledge, or the residential property disclosure statement, which is one of the most important disclosures that is mandated by the state. What that does is that reminds the seller of their responsibilities of what they need to disclose to a buyer. So just chunking it down anytime you're putting together an offer, you want to make sure you have your purchase agreement. Okay, do I have any addendums? Do I have any contingencies? Do I have any disclosures? And make sure that I have a full package. Well, the contract checklist helps out a bit with that, right? We have our pre-approval. So we want to make sure that if we're making an offer, we can prove that our buyer can pay it. That's something we have to disclose to the listing agent. Earnest money deposit within 2 days of ratification. That's not a down payment, but money that's put in the hands of an escrow agent or a settlement agent to make sure that the buyer is contractually going to act in good faith. Buyer representation agreement. We have a first-class affiliated disclosure that discloses our partnerships with some businesses. You have your standard purchase agreement, a property inspection contingency addendum. You'll get a chance to see that in just a moment. And then our common interest community request. If there's a condo or a POA, there's a form in which we were asking them to give us association forms that we can review, and the buyer will have a 3-day review on that. Seller signed disclosures. Now, with a listing, those disclosures should be uploaded with the MLS listing, and I'll share that in just a bit. Now, there are times the listing agent maybe didn't get to it or forgot, and then selling agents will start creating these disclosures. And that's not really the proper way because we can't manufacture a disclosure on behalf of the seller. That's the seller and list agent's responsibility. Now, if it is a for sale by owner, that may be a little bit different, but again, we're getting information from the seller to fill out. But we can't have our buyers pre-sign an empty disclosure that is the seller's responsibility. The consumer disclosure information form. Remember, that's the disclosure that's important between you and your buyer. And then if needed, based on different variables, because we can write contracts 1,000 different ways, if it's an unrepresented buyer, or if there's a designated agent, if you're offering on one of our firm's listings, or even dual agency. But we're going to stick kind of the basics here. We're going to work on these, right? Standard purchase agreement, any addendums, any contingencies, disclosures, and take a look at that. Now, let's say after we're all done, because I want to make sure I get this in, right? If I have a full offer and I'm emailing this over in PDF form, and I strongly suggest have it all downloaded in one PDF form and not 30 different ones, right? Just to make sure as a courtesy for that other agent, I'm writing an email with just some of the bullet points that we're offering 359.9, 3% CA, which is short for closing assistance. This is a VA loan, closing in 30 days, and a few other important things. I'm just pointing out certain highlights of the contract, emailing it over, and then calling or texting to make sure that they're received, because these will end up in spam far too often. All right, so let's move to actually rounding an offer here. I highly suggest you start from the MLS listing. What it's going to do, it is going to launch this program here, which is known as Instanet or Transaction Desk. It has two names. But let's say if we were going to open this up and let's take a look and see what's in here. So in Transaction Desk, you're going to see your prior transactions. You have icons where you can find particular forms if you're looking for it, or you can pull up, let's say, a consumer disclosure information form that I talked about. You'll have your contacts, document box, a few other things. I'm going to go back to the home page here. So we can create a transaction here and we can ask it to import data from an MLS listing. So again, Transaction Desk is where this is where the contracts live. This is where we're going to be writing them. And any documents that are important with an offer are going to carry over with us. But the most efficient way to start an offer is from the MLS listing. There are a row of icons at the top, and if you mouse over, you're going to see one that's in green for Transaction Desk. When I'm starting an offer here, it's going to pre-populate the contract with a lot of information. Who's the listing agent, listing firm, what's the address, and a few other helpful things. It just makes us more efficient. Let's go ahead and hit that button. So it's going to open up transaction desk. And it gets right to creating a transaction. Now, the other reason that we opened it up from here is, remember I said seller signed disclosures. Well, where would we find those? The listing agent is supposed to upload when they create this listing through a different process, and it's supposed to show up right here in this blue box, View Documents. Now, yes, you can open that, download the disclosures, and upload it in your transaction. So there's always a second way to do anything. There's a second and third way to do everything. But when you start it here, you'll notice that, okay, it has the address and type. Sure, it's a residential sale, okay? And it has import data. So it's going to take the information from RAIN, from the MLS number. I am the selling agent that I'm helping the buyer. I take off the wizard because it's going to ask me more questions than I need to answer. One more important part that I would highly suggest for anyone writing an offer: use our templates to make your life easier. Can you individually add documents? You can. You can even create your own template if you want to. Let's use the purchase agreement, the standard purchase agreement here, just to make life easier for ourselves. Now, I know you saw a whole list of templates. That's because I've got a million templates. But when you go in there, you'll see a handful. All right, I feel good about this. So now I'm going to create. All right. Well, let's double check and see. Does this listing have a property owners association? CIC, common interest community, HOA, POA, no. Okay, good. Because if it did, we would need another form. All right, it opens up on the details screen. Again, you can fill that out, but zoning class is not part of our contracts. They have a lot of information here because people are writing contracts on the system across the country. I believe in efficiency. So where do I go first? Well, I want to go to the document section, and I want to make sure that there are a few things there. Since I used a template, I'm going to see the first class affiliate disclosure that's needed. I'm going to see the buyer representation agreement. And then I'm also going to see there's the residential property disclosure statement signed by the seller, the lead paint disclosure because it's built prior to 1978, and then there's the military air disclosure. So if we just click one to open it up, okay, we could see the seller added their initials and then also signed it. So that's good to go. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to contacts. So the reason I go to contacts is because I want to make sure that, okay, the listing agent is listed correct. And then I want to make sure that I'm there as a selling agent, and that's correct. We have the sellers, and then I'm going to add my buyer. So it pre-populates on the contracts and makes me more efficient. So I will add an existing contact, and I think I've got one that's John Buyer, one of my, there it is, John Buyer, one of my favorite clients, and I'll go ahead and add and save. Now you can create a contact, and you're going to want first, last name, identify them as a buyer, and add an email address for any sort of electronic signatures you're going to do, and then click save. So, all right, my documents are there. I set up my contacts. Everything is correct. The next thing is I'm going to go to forms. Now, here's the difference between documents and forms. Documents are PDF files that are uploaded into the system. Forms are existing in the system and have fields in which we can add data to in electronic signatures. So now I'm working on forms. The first thing I'm going to do is take a look and see what I'm going to need here. Now you can always compare it with the purchase agreement contract checklist and literally check off what you need, highlight what you need so you're organized. Standard purchase agreement, the foundation of things. The property inspection contingency addendum. Yep, we want to inspect, and we're going to need this document. The property inspection contingency removal addendum is later. That's when we have inspected and we may ask for repairs. If I don't like it there, I can always just move it down to the bottom. So that way I've cleared a little space. No physical inspection. That's if somebody actually didn't walk into the property and may not walk in the property the entire process. Well, we viewed it in person. Not going to need that. Purchase price escalation. We're not going to use that today. We're going to stick to some of the basics, but that would be if we may go over list price in a competitive situation. Do we have an amendment? We'll leave it there just for examples. Consumer disclosure information form. Again, one of those important disclosures between the buyer and myself and my firm. I want to have that. The summary of rights. Yep, I'm going to want to make sure I have this property disclosure. Now, at that point, I can stop right there. Let me go work on my purchase agreement, and I do so by hitting the link to open it up. Here's the fun. So you'll notice that there's a lot that have already pre-populated, right? You have the buyer and seller name, you have the listing and selling firm. In this situation, we're writing on another flagship listing. So we're going to have to make sure that we do a couple of things so that we're all set. When we're writing on our own listing, at this point, this is when we become designated agents. And what that means is there's one brokerage, First Class Real Estate Flagship, that's listing this, that it represents the buyer and the seller. So as designated agents, that's essentially saying that the buyer has designated one agent for the buyer and one for the seller. And that's what we need to disclose to the buyer on a situation like this. Most often, it's going to be a different selling and listing firm, and you may not have to do that. So this address right at, or this date right at the top, that's when we're authoring the agreement. This is what that basically helps draw attention to an agreement that was dated March 25th, let's say. So we have our buyer and our seller already filled out. This is a great thing about starting the offer from the MLS listing. Remember when we use the green icon right there, and then we used a template, it makes us faster. If not, we are typing a lot of extra stuff. So we have our agreement to sell the property. You're going to see the different addresses, which is the legal address and the residential address. Our earnest money deposit in section 2 for this house, we're going to put $1,000, which is appropriate for this price point. And then we're going to do it by automated clearinghouse, otherwise known as ACH. We're going to make sure that they use some sort of online process so they don't have to drive across town and drop off a check. They're going to go ahead and close with, let's say, Fortis Title. We put both of our suggested settlement escrow agents in that. You choose one for your buyer or let them choose which of the two they would like to use. Now, they do have the right to use somebody else if they want, but a lot of times the buyers aren't really sure who to use. Advising them to get connected with somebody with good customer service is always a winning proposition. Now, moving forward in line 21, 2 checkboxes. The buyer has paid or will pay. Well, will pay means within 2 days of ratification, meaning all the parties have complete agreement of the terms, all initials, all signatures have been attained, any changes have been initialed by buyer and seller, and we have a complete signed offer. Now we're ratified. And that starts the clock. So ratification day is always what they call day 0, right? The day that something is either signed, like a ratification, or sent over as the event. So the timeline always starts the next day. So if we were ratified on Tuesday, day 1 is Wednesday on your timeline. So you would have 2 days, 2 business days to get in the earnest money deposit to the settlement agent identified in line 19 here as Fortis Title. This other checkbox means that they've already submitted a check, which is okay if they do. So for purchase price, and we're making an offer on this home here, and let's say it's not competitive, we'll use a scenario that there is no competition, but it's been on the market 2 days, and we've already checked comps, and we know that based on comparable sales, that this is probably appropriately priced, if not maybe even a little under. So in this scenario, we're going to offer list price. So your buyer may be tempted in this situation to get a little money off the price, let's say. And that's fine. If you want to start a little lower, if it makes them happy that they save a couple $1,000. But your buyer in this scenario is, let's say, a VA buyer, and they have no money down, but you know what? They're going to need closing cost. So when we may be saving money on going below list price, well, what happens at that point, now the buyer may lose out on negotiating important closing cost assistance that they're going to need. So at that point, it's like, what's more important? Saving a couple of thousand off the listing price or getting 3% closing costs to help you with your loan. So we have to think about that. Now, in this, the down payment is basically $0, right? And it's going to be a 100% loan. Now, these are basically reflected as dollar amounts. So another thing you can do to do this is opening up this markup palette and clicking this for notes, and you can write 0%. Now, I always want to make it, probably about 12. I want to bold the font too. I just want it a little bit more visible, and I'll put 0%. And then I want to repeat that again, and we'll put 100%. And again, I want to be consistent. So I'm going to do this at 12 font and bold, and now I have this here. So what am I essentially doing? So in line 32 here, what is the down payment? Well, since it's a VA loan, it's going to be 0%. I'm going to reflect that. And then what will be the loan? The loan's going to be 100%. Now, a common question is, do I subtract the earnest money deposit? Do not, right? You don't have to do that. What are they putting down? And what sort of percentage or dollar amount will they pay for the loan? If this was, let's say, FHA loan, they could be putting 3.5% down, and then the loan amount would be 96.5%. If let's say this was going to be a dollar amount, they're going to buy something that is a conventional loan, and they are going to, I'm going to move this out of the way just so you can see this here, just so you have some reference in the future. If let's say they're going to buy a $100,000 property and they're going to put 10% down. Okay, well, 10% of 100,000 is $10,000. So that means that the other 90%, 90% will be by what kind of loan type they are using. So it could either be dollar amount or it could be percentage. So for this example, to use something we do often, 100%, and then we write here, I love cap locks, VA loan, right? So now we have identified a loan. It could be FHA loan, VA loan, conventional loan, VHDA loan, which is a first-time buyer type loan. So you have choices. If it was cash, now I wouldn't put anything for down payment or anything for percentage. I would just simply say or type that we are buying it all in cash. And you'll come across that quite a bit. So next is ratification box, and that is not signed until there's full agreements and whoever the agent is holding that last. In our template, you'll notice that settlement expenses, there is something pre-written there. And this is to help you be more efficient. And it says seller to pay 3% of the purchase price towards buyer settlement expenses. So remember, it costs money to get money. Certain things like prepaid or points to help bring their interest payment down. POC items is short for paid outside of closing. Buyer transaction fee or some other thing that would need to be paid that the lender would allow, right? It can't be something where the seller is just going to give cash to the buyer. It doesn't work that way. Well, this we can also edit. So for some reason, if our buyer needed 4%, we can always type that in. Or if maybe it was something lower, like 2%, or it can also be reflected as a dollar amount if needed. Deposit, that just explains to the escrow agent that once they have the earnest money check, they've got 5 days to deposit. Line 6 or section 6 is where we identify the lender. We put our lender partners here, choose the one that's appropriate. Sometimes there are agents that will also put the lender name and their phone number too for direct contact to build credibility so that the listing agent, if they wanted to check in with the lender, that see if they had any sort of questions that they can certainly ask. In contract training, we'll go over a bit more detail on what each paragraph means. I want you to see the mechanics of putting an offer together. So there are lines as far as if the loan was denied and what would happen, or if they wanted to change lender with seller's permission. So moving on to line 127, intend to occupy. We have the box in our template, check this does. And the reason for that is because FHA and VA loans are owner occupant loans, primary residence, not like a conventional where it could be owner occupant or investor. Representations basically means that the buyer is telling the truth as to who they are and they have the financial ability to buy. In this, on our templates, we mark that it is not on a septic. Settlement. Now, typically, most loans are about 30 days, but we do have to put a date in here. If we're writing today, we may be negotiating all the way until tomorrow. So I don't want to lose a whole day if it may take a day or two. So let me fast forward and see, okay, if today was the 25th and that's a Friday, we might need till the 26th. We may actually need until about the 29th, just a few extra days. So we're really writing this for about 2 to 34 days out to make sure that we have enough time. Can we write it shorter for like 25 days? You can. It's just you're going to have to run your transaction at a good pace in order to get that done. There's 10 days that are written in. That's an automatic extension if for some reason the loan is not ready or the title is not processed. Moving forward, this paragraph states that the buyer is going to get a general warranty deed and needs to be insurable or marketable in order for it to close. So this section, line 253, this is if a buyer wanted to get a survey, and let's say they desire a survey, and that's going to be, as it states, at buyer's expense. Is it negotiable? Could you negotiate the seller to pay for it? Yes, you could, but most times it's the buyer's due diligence, and buyer due diligence items are at their expense. They could be checking for flood insurance rates if it happens to be in a flood zone. How would I determine that? Well, if I'm on the listing, I can click the tab for flood map, and I'm looking to see where it is. Well, we've got a little bit of purple here, don't we? What does that mean? If you look at the key down to the bottom, if you have anything that is purple, now don't mistaken for the parcel that's highlighted. We're looking on the map where you'll see A. So this light purple means 100-year floodplain. That means there's a 1% chance of a flood each year. That, if you are financed, would require flood insurance. If it's cash, you don't require flood insurance, but it's a good idea to get. So this is pretty interesting and a great example here where the home is actually in the orange. So the orange is out of the special flood hazard area, meaning flood insurance is not required, probably a slim chance of a flood. Doesn't mean it can happen, but slim chance. So areas in the yellow and the orange, you don't have to pay flood insurance. Purple, you do. Now, if this flood area, this purple area is touching the structure, that's when flood insurance is going to be required because that means the structure is considered in the flood zone. So this is an interesting one because part of the flood zone is on the parcel, but the actual structure is out of the flood zone. Something you're going to want to research more just so that your buyer is not surprised. But being this close, I would highly advise someone get a flood. It's a survey for flood insurance known as an elevation certificate. It's listed in the contract on line 255 to protect them. Prorations in our template, we have A checked, meaning that if there's any sort of taxes or association dues, the seller will pay that up until closing. Now, section 11 is financing. And financing is a contingency in the contract because if they are not approved for a loan, nobody's buying a house. Now, in this one, it is a VA loan, so we're checking the box. And then in line 272, we have to make sure that this price that we add here, which is $369, we need to make sure that that matches the final agreed amount on page 1 of the ratified purchase agreement. Why? Because the home needs to appraise at least for that number for the bank to approve it. Now, the buyer may move forward if they wanted to pay cash above the appraised value, or if, let's say, the seller was willing to reduce. But that's something that you're going to have to make sure that you have corrected on a final offer. Now, moving forward, there are other check boxes if there were other loan types. And then line 299, appraised value, explains in more detail what happens if the home does not appraise. Property condition, this basically says that the buyer accepts the home in its present condition, except what they find during a home inspection. Sometimes there are scenarios where there may be some pre-negotiation of an item. Let's say they're in the home and they notice that there is a ceiling fan that's ready to fall off the ceiling. Well, this is where you can type in something, seller agrees to replace ceiling fan in the kitchen, let's say. Not often are we writing pre-negotiated repairs, but if there is something up front, this may be added before someone is buying a home inspection. So in line 320, has the buyer or have they not physically inspected? So here they have walked in. If they have not, then that's when you want to have the no physical inspection addendum. You do want to be honest about that because there are plenty of cameras and you name it, and they'll know if somebody was there or not. The reason we disclose that is because somebody may have a different opinion of the house once they finally do walk in it. And it is a contributing factor on if a listing agent is going to encourage their seller to select your offer or not. Paragraph 13. So these are known as cap items. This is where there are termite moisture appraisal, possibly well and septic repairs at play. If you left this blank, well, the contract states that the parties will assume that it is 1%, even if you miss it. Writing in 1% as it has in our template is a good idea, so there's full agreement and no surprises. That's basically saying that the buyer and seller have pre-negotiated 1% of the purchase price to go towards possible appraisal repairs or termite moisture. Now, speaking of that, this wood destroying organism check, how would we write this? In our templates, we have buyer obtains and seller expense. So that means that the buyer will obtain a report from a local inspection company for this, and then the seller will pay for it at closing most times. Now, the negotiation as to who obtains and who buys can go back and forth, but we write this as an advantage for the buyer. And we also state in this timeline that we're going to get this inspection done within 10 days of ratification, and you don't want to miss it. So there could be other outlying properties or structures rather on the property that need to be checked. And we want to make sure that we include those, like if there is some sort of shed with a VA loan and even FHA, I've seen where they'll look at detached garages, they'll look at sheds and have that part of their appraisal report. So we want to make sure that we include that here. Moving forward, we have checked boxes that are appropriate as far as public drinking water. It is not on a septic, so we are leaving check boxes off for this scenario. And then the walkthrough inspection, we were asking the seller to be responsible for providing utilities. You'll notice that it's underlined. And the reason for that is because there is great failure rates and sellers turning off utilities early. Your buyer is going to have an opportunity prior to closing to go to the house to make sure that agreed upon repairs are done, that the home is substantially in the same condition, and they're going to test some of the systems. They're going to turn on the water to see, is there hot water? They're going to turn on the AC. So they need electric, water, probably gas as well, and that's going to be important for this walkthrough. So now we're on contingencies. Now remember, contingencies are due diligence. The buyer will move forward if they are satisfied. A common interest community disclosure. In this scenario, it is not. But if it was, I'm going to need to have an additional addendum so that we can request association documents, and I will have to disclose what the monthly price is on this condo or association fee. How would we know that? Well, if we're in a listing and we look to the very bottom, it's going to be in the lower right-hand corner where they discuss some of the fees. Now, moving forward, because there's a big paragraph for common interest communities such as condos and POAs. Now we're on property inspections. And our template, we have desires in line 463. One of the most important parts for a buyer is to being able to have an inspection to make sure that the home is in good condition. You don't want to mess this one up. And the template's got you covered. So since we have that checked as that we desire a property inspection, it's going to bring in another addendum, which is the property inspection contingency addendum. So pretty important here. I want to see if I can even, I'll have to save this and go back. Sorry, hit the wrong button. So we'll go back to our forms and then our standard purchase agreement. Thanks for your patience. What I was trying to do is highlight something for you, and I sent it straight to signatures. And we're going to go to signatures here in a little bit so you can see that process. All right, so we are on the property inspection contingency. Here we go. So what we wanted to do is highlight. Not necessarily saying highlight this for a buyer, but just for your knowledge here that you want to understand that if you check desires, as you should, that it brings in the property inspection contingency addendum. So we have our standard purchase agreement, we have our addendums, we have disclosures. If we're going to inspect, we have an addendum that'll open up next so you can see why that matters. Now, there could be other things in regards to the exterior of the home, or if there's lead-based paint, there is a disclosure in this where the seller claims no knowledge. Most times we are waiving and not following through on a lead paint inspection. It really depends on your buyer and their unique needs. There are people who do want to find out information, but there has to be mutual agreement between the parties as far as doing this inspection. Other contingencies, and that would be if there was something else, like your buyer had a home that they needed to sell, or there was some other due diligence that's needed or event that needs to happen in order for someone to buy. So items to convey, for time's sake, I'm only going to spend limited time on this, but you do need to accurately check what comes with the house. In the listing, this is where you're going to look under a couple of things. You're going to look under appliances and equipment. And if these are marked wrong, there is a chance that your buyer won't get it, right? And you want to make sure that you are asking for things that are on the listing. If you're asking for, let's say, a washer dryer, which is not listed here, all right, a washer hookup is not a washer. That's the hookup on the wall, that you're letting the listing agent know that the buyers are requesting that they install a washer dryer. So in this case, they have a dishwasher, a range, a refrigerator, and a ceiling fan, right? So we want to make sure that we have our dishwasher, our one refrigerator, and then our electric range, that's checked. Any blinds, we're asking for that. We'll ask for the trash cans if they're there. And then we asked for ceiling fans, and we'll just ask for all of them. So you want to take time to make sure you have the correct check boxes. And then if there was any sort of additional items, that would be maybe a children's playground or security system. Confirmations and disclosures. This is when we are, pardon me, we want to make sure that we are confirming what sort of brokerage relationship that we have. So most times in line 536, you're going to have number 2 check, which is listing firm is representing the seller and selling firm is representing the buyer, meaning each side has their own representative. In this case, it's a little bit different. We're making an offer on a first-class listing. So we want to make sure that we uncheck 2, but we're going to check number 6. But what does it state there? That the listing firm represent both buyer and seller. So we're going to be designated agents, and we have number 6, but it says, we need to add something, which is a disclosure of designated agencies. So now we have another disclosure that we'll add here in a moment. So we're looking at aircraft noise, and there is a way that we can look up a map to verify this. And we're looking at a listing, and they told us that this ACUS information here, that it's none as far as crash, and then -65 for noise. So we want to put none here and then -65. And you got to be careful. I see where agents have that reversed quite a bit. There's going to be a number of other disclosures, including agency interest disclosures and contract training. We'll get deeper into all of these. These are the mechanics of writing an offer. This is where we would disclose if we were related to the buyer or if the buyer or seller is a licensed real estate agent. More disclosures, and then brokerage fee. So when it comes to compensation, we're not sure what is offered until we communicate with a listing agent. And we would need to ask them, what sort of compensation is your seller offering? Sometimes they won't disclose and say, well, add it to your offer. And that's in a situation when the seller has decided that, I'm not going to offer anything, but we'll see all the offer terms before I make a decision on that. So that's a conversation you need to have with your buyer too, up front, as far as what sort of compensation you'll be paid and the situation if they're not going to, meaning the seller is not going to pay it, and how that's worked out. So in this case, we've reached out to the listing agent. And they said we're offering 2% compensation. Okay, well, we're going to add 2 in there, and that paragraph says that the seller has agreed to pay 2. Now, you and your buyer may have an agreement at 3, so that means maybe they're actually going to be paying 1% of your compensation. So, moving forward, there is paragraphs in regards to default. If somebody decides to just walk out of the contract, or dispute resolution, how we'll all be in mediation if that happens. Other provisions is a section in which somebody can ask for an additional item. We will buy this provided you give us a home warranty. You notice that we have this in our template to help you remember to try to obtain this for your buyer because it may help out. I have a client who had problems with their heating and air, and this is saving them about $3,500 in repairs. So it is something that most times you want to see it. Can you negotiate this in? It'll be a good situation to help your buyer. But there could be other things, maybe provisions that are going to add carpet, or maybe they have decided that they're going to give the buyer a credit for appliances or something. So this is where other provisions can take care of that. You're going to have a few other disclosures, miscellaneous. I'll wrap that up for you. Real estate is a 7-day work week unless you write in business banking day in the contract. Then it's Monday through Friday. But I can tell you 99.9% of the contracts you run into are going to be Monday through Sunday. You are open for business. Signing if there's electronic signatures and having all parties agree. And then you're going to have the signatures. And you want to double check, make sure that that's correct. If you have a buyer signature, you're signing this too. Now, agents don't initial pages, right? Agents sign the bottom lines. Sometimes it asks for our initials, but most times we're just signing on the bottom line. You want to make sure that the addresses, that your RAIN ID, that the firm IDs are correct. Our templates pre-populate this information, again, just making you more efficient. Great. All right. So we made it through that. So what we want to do is we want to save it. I always believe in kind of extra saving these things. And now with transaction forms, I can click this and quickly get to the next thing I want to fill out, which is a property inspection contingency addendum. All right. So this is stating what sort of inspection we're going to do in the timeline. It's a super important form, but not lengthy to fill out. Pre-populates a lot of the information. We're going to do a home inspection. That is going to be someone who is a DPOR licensed home inspector, and that seller will have all the utilities on, and that's super important. We could check boxes if there are other inspections that we plan to do. The timeline on this, well, 10 days is pretty typical in this market, but we negotiated it where we're going to try to do this in 7. That means we're going to inspect and either release or get our property inspection contingency removal in, stating what repairs we want to negotiate. Page 2, and I highly suggest that you read this. This is the property inspection contingency addendum, right? Read it all, but page 2, read it twice. It describes the negotiation period on what happens next if we are negotiating repairs. You'll notice there's initial spots and then the signatures at the bottom. All right, so now I'm going to save and exit here. So we have our purchase agreement, we have our property inspection contingency, and we have our disclosures. Now, for time's sake, what I'm going to do is we're going to move this on to a signing so you can see the process on this. Instead of drag and drop items, we're going to stick mostly to the populated signatures so you can see how this works. Now, there's a few different ways you can do it. You can either select the forms you want, click the basket, and move it on to a signature that is signified by the pen icon, right? Now, I suggest going to signings. Now, the differences between the left and right here on Transaction Desk is you'll see a pen on the left and a pen or signings on the right. Now, anything that's done on the left side of Transaction Desk is going to take you out to the main screen to the general area. Anything that's done on the right is going to keep you within your transaction, which I highly suggest. Now, the reason why I would go to signings first is because I'm going to be using forms and documents, and they are in two different buckets, two different spots. So if I go to signings, I'll be able to obtain items from both. So now this opens it up, and I'm going to add a signature, and we will call this sample offer for Fox Hollow. Now, whatever you name it, something appropriate, right? Because your buyer is going to see the signing name, and this is something that will be part of the documents, and I want to save. Now it's going to open it up. And the first thing I want to do is I'll want to assign my signers. So all my signers, I could add myself, but I'm going to add from transaction. So remember when I did contacts, I set my buyer in here. There's John Buyer. I don't need to add the listing agent. I don't need to add the seller. The other agent will handle all of that. Now I could add myself and sign during an electronic signature, but I'm going to show you how you can sign as you're creating the document, and I will click select. So right now, my signer is my one buyer. Now, if you see a little red flag, that means you missed something earlier, and that's probably adding an email address. So it does give you a second opportunity to update the information. Now I want to add forms and documents. Now watch this closely here, all right? So when I click add, it's going to take me right to my transaction. And this is when you can use your purchase contract checklist to make sure that you're choosing the right things so that you're not missing anything. Well, in this case, we want to add a standard purchase agreement, and we want to add the property inspection contingency addendum. We definitely want to have the consumer disclosure information form, and we want to have our summary and rights obligations of sellers and purchasers. Right? We don't need our no physical inspection because we've seen it. The walkthrough report is later in the transaction. We don't need an escalation. We don't need the removal addendum because that's later. Now we are on, you see how it changed. It changed, you can see the icons change from forms to now documents. Now we're in another bucket. So certain things we will need the first class affiliate disclosure form. We will need a buyer representation agreement if we don't already have that signed. If we have it signed, which we should early in the relationship before showing homes, we're good. But if we're still catching up with that, these are items that are listed that you would need. So use the cheat sheets, do a practice round. Now, what's next on the list is the seller signed disclosures. Well, what we call the DPOR, which is the residential property disclosure acknowledgement, we need that. The real estate transfer disclosure of properties located in a military air zone. Save yourself some time and call it the ACUs. We will add, and then the lead paint disclosure we will add there too. So we've got a lot. And what I suggest is line it up by who needs certain documents, right? Now, what I would do is I would line up the first class affiliated and the buyer disclosure. You see how I'm doing this? I'm dragging and dropping these. Now, another quick way you can do it is by simply changing the number in the order, and it will quickly change which document you have in that section. So you can either type in the number or drag and drop. Use the first class items first, like a buyer representation agreement, and then also the first class affiliate. After you have full signature, there is a way that you can separate these documents out if needed, and that's what I would suggest. What do we have next? We have our purchase agreement, our property inspection contingency addendum. Oh, let me get to my documents icon on the right. Then I have consumer disclosure information form, summary of rights. So I'm going to line this up by giving the listing agent what they need in order to share with their client. The purchase agreement, the property inspection contingency, and now I'm going to move up the DPOR form right after the property inspection. I'm going to move up the ACUS, the air noise disclosure, to that grouping as well, and then lead paint. So how I have this written or set up here is I have my buyer representation agreement. I have my first class affiliate disclosure, my standard purchase agreement. Now I'm in the part where this is what I'm going to give to the listing agent. My purchase agreement, property inspection contingency, our ACUS seller sign disclosure, our lead paint seller sign disclosure, and then our residential property seller sign disclosure. I have the consumer disclosure information form and the summary. Now, the consumer disclosure, otherwise known as the CDIF and the summary of rights, are more for you and the buyer, but it's okay if it's in the offer. It's okay if you send it to the listing agent. That's fine. It's not going to hurt anybody. But the buyer representation agreement and the affiliate, that I would want to separate before I sent this out. All right. So I have these forms, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to tools. So on the right, we had our signers. We were assigning, okay, who's going to be a part of the signing process. I've added my documents and my forms, and now I'm going to tools. Now here, since we're using forms within the system, what Transaction Desk is going to do is recognize that my buyer needs to initial in the spot, and it makes life a lot easier. Now, could I drag and drop an initial? Sure, I can do that if needed. These I can click and it's going to pop on the contract and I can move it around. Yes, I can shrink the sizes of these if I wanted to. There's a number of things that I'm going to do. But the system will do a pretty good job as far as making sure the initials are in the right spot. But you can't assume. You're wanting to go each page and see, okay, there's initial, there's another one, and see if there's, make sure that the formatting is correct because you're sending out a contract with your name on it. You want to make sure that things are correct. So looking through again, I see more initials. Great. Everything looks like it's in good spot so far. And okay, so here's our initial. We want to make sure nothing is missing. Okay, we have another initial. Our brokerage fee, another initial. There's going to be two initials here. And yes, even though there's an initial here in the middle of the page, if it calls for another initial, you want to make sure you have that. Well, here's the signing. Okay, great. Well, now what's missing? My signature, right? The agents need to sign the bottom of lines of these contracts. So I could add a new signer by adding myself, or I always love the cheat codes, right? So I can go to tools and I can hit the drop down arrow and then I can go to myself. This allows me to drag and drop a signature. It's going to ask me for some sort of disclosure. I click it and now I have signed the document as I'm creating the document to save a step. You certainly can email yourself an electronic signature. I like to work a little bit faster. All right, more initials. Oh, I need to sign this one too. Has my name on it. I will drag and drop. Now, on the disclosures, the system, as it did here, did see where the purchaser needed to have a signature. Sometimes the system doesn't necessarily see that. So you want to make sure that you are looking out for the purchaser's or agent information. Now, here's an example. This is a spot where the buyer needs to acknowledge certain things, where the seller says they have no knowledge of lead paint and no reports. So now we're going to have to change the signing ownership here to the buyer, make sure that we're signing with the right person, and drop some initials. we're going to drop two. One over has received a copy of this pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead Paint. And then we will add another one here, which is waive the opportunity. And this is most often how these are signed, where the seller is acknowledging no information, no reports, and then the buyer getting a pamphlet, which we can add to this. We're going to do that and then waive the 10-day opportunity. So we need to make sure that now we see the buyer signature is missing and then the agent is missing. So we need to make sure that we're adding this and then we have to add ourselves. So the system can be inconsistent as far as seeing signatures. So on this one, on the seller disclosure, it did recognize on this consumer disclosure information form, we have initials, which is great. And we have the buyer signature, but we need to add our own on here too. Now we're on the summary of rights. We don't sign that, that's just the buyer. So we have everything signed. Two things that we did not do, which we can. One is filling out the buyer representation agreement. And this one is going to be a little bit different because you're going to have to do more drag and drop. Now, this is something that I would highly advise you to have signed before, but you can drop in the full name of the person. You can also drop in your full name. And then you can also, for your buyer, you can drag and drop initials, fill out information, and then add signatures where appropriate. So that's something that you can do in order to fill out these documents. It's not a form, it's a document, and that's when you have to drag and drop things. But let's say we forgot something. There was one important document. I'll refresh your memory here, which was, well, we're buying a first-class listing. Now, most often it's going to be a different listing and selling firm, so box 2 will be checked. In this case, it's box 6 for designated. Well, now I'm going to save my electronic signing. And I want to go back to what I was working on before. And then I'm going to add a form. So I'm going to go to the right, go to forms, and I'm going to add. A quick way to find what you're looking for is just use the search bar. We know we're looking for designated. You'll see 3. When you click a 0, all 3 are going to be highlighted. That's because this form is in 3 different folders, but it's only going to add 1. So we want to make sure that we add that. So let's open this up and take a look at it. All right, it has the address rather, and then we're gonna have to put who is representing who. So in this case, we're representing the buyer and the sellers on this, right? So we're putting the name of the broker and the firm. So here we'll put George Misak. He is the name of the broker. We can add the firm if we want to, which is First Class Real Estate Flagship. But if you put the name of the broker, you're fine. So now we are adding who's representing who. So in this case, it is Amy Pierce, who is representing the seller as a standard agent, meaning you're going to do all that an agent does. There could be times when it's limited, but you're going to want to consult with us on that. And then you'll also have Troy Brimmer, who's going to be representing the buyers as a standard agent. And we filled that out correctly. And now this is something where the buyer and sellers sign, not even the agents. All right, great. So we want to make sure that we save this. We can either save it here or save and exit. Now I want to add this to my signing and not have to redo the signing all over again. So I'm going to go to signings on the right-hand side. I will find the one that is still a draft, which was sample offer for Fox Hollow. Let me open this up. Right. I'm going to go to documents and I need to add that one. So I can go back to add document and form again. And then let me find it. There it is, disclosure of designated agency. And I will click add. I'm going to click close. Now it's at the bottom and it's pretty important. Now this is more of a form that's between the firm and the buyer. So I'm going to add this above the purchase agreement So it's right after my buyer representation agreement, my first class affiliated, that discloses our buyer affiliations. And then right here, disclosure of designated agency. So just scrolling real quick, we have our buyer rep agreement, and we have our first class affiliated business arrangement disclosure here. There it is, disclosure of designated. So I'm disclosing this before we even fill out or sign the contract theoretically. So that's why I have it before. You'll see where it has our designated agents, and now it has populated the initials of the buyer and seller. Now, this is something that we do send over to the listing agent because we do need the seller to sign. That buyer and seller need to know that this is all happening over one firm. And then we have our purchase agreement. So let's say I've now added all my signatures and I'm ready to go. Now I'm going to click next in the upper right-hand corner. It's going to give me two opportunities here. One, I can just click send. You don't have to add an expiration to your electronic signing. You don't have to send any reminders. You can just go ahead and send it. What's going to happen is your buyer is going to get an email from AuthentiSign that gives them an opportunity to sign. They can do it on their phone or a laptop, but it's a lot easier on a laptop. And you can customize invites. So if this is where you wanted to write, here is your offer or whatever you wanted to type. And that way they are seeing something specific you typed. If you're sending this to 3 people, you're going to have to customize each invite. They'll all be lined up. But in this case, we can click send. And what will happen next is your buyer will get an email that they can open and sign. If you did send it to yourself rather than signing when you're preparing the document, well, that's something that you'll have to also sign. When you get a complete email, that's when you can download either the PDF all in one or in different pieces, and then you can continue to work on things. What you'll want to do is, as I mentioned earlier, that's when you're drafting an email, sending it over to the listing agent. You're going to want to send the offer and the appropriate information in regards to what's in this offer, and then also a pre-approval. Then at that point, that's when the negotiations start. So as you can see, this is going to take a little bit of time to practice, and that's why I would suggest finding a home, checking some comparable sales, and then putting together a sample offer so you can at least get familiar with the mechanics of getting an offer together.